Well, welcome everybody to our first annual themed entertainment design show. I'm your host Andy Garfield, and always with me is Patrick Kling. Say hi, Patrick.
Hey everybody, or hi Patrick. Wait, was that
Yeah.
second annual? Wait, what was that second show? I kind of got confused.
It's the first annual second show. I don't know. It's our second first anniversary show. There it is. Second first anniversary show.
Yeah,
That's why I went with the first anniversary graphic again. I think it's going to be that all month. I think it's just going to be celebrating our first anniversary all month.
I think that's
So
great.
how was your weekend? Everything good?
Oh, beautiful weekend, beautiful weekend. So I'm in Orlando, of course, and had a really actually went to Universal Studios. This
Oh wow,
is very earth-shattering news.
this is unusual for you.
Yeah, well, I haven't been. I had an annual pass for a long time, and then I stopped the annual pass, and then I would only usually go for Halloween Horror Nights or when a friend was like, "Hey, you want to go?" And this happened. A group of friends and we went, and it was, for those in Orlando know that it was like pouring rain last night until around 5:00, which is when we got there, and had a universal good time. I caught finally the Bourne Stuntacular show, and it is absolutely incredible. The technological wizardry was in effect, and really enjoyed myself. It was really fun seeing that. So, that was obviously a show that opened during COVID-19. Like, they were about to open it before they shut everything down, and then they got it up. And I just want to applaud anybody that worked on that show, because it was really quite a lot of fun. So the technology is pretty stunning. I'll just say it is getting harder and harder to tell when somebody's on a screen versus whether they're actually there in person, and they did a really great job with that. So I commend them.
Yeah, that's at the top of my list for when I go back to Orlando later this year. For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean those big high dot pitch LED screens are just incredible. Like, we've seen them in Vegas and in concerts over the last couple of years, getting more higher resolution and larger in scale, to the point where your reality is blurred. Like you said, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah. They just for those of you that do get a better idea, who maybe are on the West Coast, for those who've been on Mission Breakout at Guardians of the Galaxy at California Adventure, when you're in the middle of the screen and like when you're in the middle of the ride, you see those screens and they're so bright and they're so vibrant. It looks very realistic. They did that at Stuntacular, except it's on a much the grander scale. So
Yeah.
really cool.
Did you gaze upon the Velocicoaster as well, or did you just go to the studios?
Just went to the studios park, so I missed out on that. But because it was so rainy. But we did, we done all the classics and went on E.T.'s Adventure. It was fun. And saw the cinematic spectacular show. I hadn't seen that. I've only seen the Marathon and Mayhem, so it was nice seeing. The music was just so much better in this show than in the Marathon and Mayhem. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was good. It was a lot. It was really a lot of fun seeing the show. Just seeing a nighttime spectacular was kind of weird, So it's like I was kind of like just going into Universal was something that would, we do all the time. So I was just trying to like figure out my memory of like I haven't been there in a year and a half or 2 years or whatever it was, because of COVID. I haven't been. I've been to Disney, but I haven't been there yet. So that was a lot of fun. And I might. Who knows? How quick I'll be back. I'm sure I'll be back soon.
Did you go on Men in Black? Of course. What was your score?
I did not go on Men in Black.
Okay, so you didn't go on all the classics then.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting what happened there. So we were with the group, and it's not too interesting. But every ride was a walk-on because it was raining all day, and then we went to Gringotts Bank, and it was posted at 15 minutes. I went in and we stopped pretty far back in the queue, like way back almost to the extended queue, and I looked around me and saw the crowds, and I was like, I'm not fully vaccinated yet. I'm going to leave. So I went and I waited around for a while, and that was like we thought it was going to be quick. It wasn't. And then our group decided to bail about 30 minutes in. And then I had like a butterbeer, so I was just chilling there outside. And that ate into what would have been our Men in Black time. So we did E.T. instead. But yeah, I will have to, that is on I'm sure I'll go on that soon. Oh my God, these shadows are crazy. Let me turn this ring light off. No,
it's like very German expressionistic.
Yeah, it is. It's like a
cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
There's nothing I can do here, I guess. I apologize. All right, yeah. So that was my big news in my world. How about you, Andy? Anything for your weekend?
No, everything's still closed.
Right. Yeah. No, fair enough.
I was just here in the studio working on my stuff, and getting ready for the show today. And boy, we have a lot of news. We haven't really covered the news in months. We've had so many special hosts and special guests and
Yeah.
specials. And then last week we just like got right to it, with all of our announcements and guests and everything like that, and our celebratory uh episode. But yeah, I mean, like, I say things are closed now, but like the bubble is about to burst here in
Mhm.
Southern California with Disneyland, Disney's California Adventure opening on April 29th or 30th,
Mhm.
with their unbelievably complicated ticketing system, which I've read so many articles about that, and I'm still just like, like that gif of what's his name, like,
Yeah. Where do you?
like, it's so unnecessarily complicated, but like whatever. And Knott's opens on gosh, what is it? May 21st.
Yeah.
And Six Flags opened on April 1st, just
Yeah.
little under 2 weeks ago, which is awesome. I haven't talked to anybody who's been there yet, like how that's going or anything at all. What the experience is like. I might have to head up there and see it
Yeah.
for myself.
Well, and also Universal Studios Hollywood, they opened, and I think they like started opening their rides
Yeah,
during the taste of whatever it was. So they're getting fired up. So of course we have Secret Life of Pets, and we
yep.
have the Jurassic World. They're finishing their punch list, and new stuff is there. So that's cool.
I watched the YouTube video of the new Jurassic World scenes, and I didn't watch the Secret Life of Pets because I want to be totally surprised about that. But I knew what the scenes were going to be for Jurassic World, so I might as well watch them and see how they turned out. And I'm like, wow, I can't wait to go on this thing.
That's cool. Looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm probably going to go to LA this summer. So, Jamie's going to let us all in. So I got to go. I got to take advantage of that.
I'd love to go with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. No, for sure. It's gonna happen. I'll be going to LA. God, I'm like totally blinded.
Just don't move.
No, I'm right here. There we go. Right there. So Andy, yeah. What else? We got Velocicoasters opening
Oh,
December.
and the Avengers campus is opening at DCA.
Yeah,
I don't think it's opening with the park. I think it's opening a little bit later. I can't remember. See if I can find that.
yeah. June something, right? Like June 4th weekend.
June 4th. Yeah, so June 4th, Velocicoaster, and then Velocicoaster is June 10th. Yeah, so like it's gonna be a great summer for theme parks,
Mhm.
I think. What California is talking about lifting all restrictions June 15th, I believe it is. So like
Wow.
it's back to normal and full capacity, and pandemic is over. Kind of like it's been in Florida for the last 9 months. Pandemic's just over.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that we have cases are going up here, so
Yeah,
we're still cautious. Wearing a mask and all that.
of course, yeah.
Um,
Well, I got my first
like,
shot.
oh, sorry.
I got my first shot up in Bakersfield last week. I saw the Wheaton posts about it, and we just drove up and got it, easy peasy, and no side effects to speak of, really.
That's great.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to Vegas next week to
Yes.
I'm gonna check out a Mega Mart Meow Wolf installation there, and I'll be posting some. Well, Jamie will be posting some TikTok videos that I take.
Yeah. Yeah, we got Adam Sandy from Zamperos coming up next week, right, CJ? Or no, is Natalie? No, they switched.
Natalie is next week.
Natalie Nielsen's coming on with another guest, so that's gonna be exciting. So we got all the fun stuff. You're gonna be in Vegas, and then I'll be out the next week. So we're gonna be having a couple of weeks off here, but that's gonna be, it's gonna be good. It's a good stuff. I mean, we're a year in. We got quite an incredible network of people here who are, on this stuff and ready to talk. And of course, we love talking about, thought leading topics in the industry. So that leads perfectly into our guest Lito, who's in the green room. He needs no introduction. No, go.
But let's introduce him.
No, Lito, hey man, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Hi there, everyone.
It's great to see you, man. Welcome, welcome. So yeah, it's really great to have you on. We were chatting a couple weeks ago and about, you've had a bit of an experience this summer of watching or digesting the changes that are happening in our industry,
Yeah.
and you felt the need to share it a little bit with your club. Why don't you talk to us about that, and before we get started, and talk about yourself as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can just do all in one. So, hi, my name is Lito. I'm a fifth-year architecture student over at the University of Notre Dame. Going to Notre Dame, it's a wonderful school. Love going there. But sometimes just the diversity numbers aren't quite there just yet. We're working on some things that kind of get more diversity on campus. But because of that, there wasn't a lot of kind of discussions about where the industry was going this summer. There were kind of some questions and concerns about some of the changes we were making, or that they're making in the industry moving forward. So I thought it might be a good idea just to kind of address those concerns as one of the few people of color kind of involved on campus. So I made a little presentation to kind of discuss kind of where representation has come in the parks, where it was before, how it kind of got to where it was, and kind of where it's moving next, if that sort of makes sense. So.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. I've had a sneak peek of your presentation, and I'm really excited to share it with our audience.
Wonderful.
Well, what I will say is that you already had this thing baked, but you're also welcome to come on and talk about anything you want. It doesn't always have to be diversity, right? Hey,
Yeah.
it always happens like, oh, great, have a person of color on, talk about diversity. You just have it baked, and we'll happy to have you back on and talk about whatever you want.
Sure,
But you're so passionate about it, right? So
Yeah.
it's when you kind of showed me a little bit about it, but it was really great, and so I'm looking forward to our audience having a bit of a sneak peek. So if you're watching and you have any comments, feel free to comment, and we can kind of have a discussion. But other than that, let's take it away. Or have you take it away?
Wonderful. I want to get those slides up. Perfect. So I want to flip to the next slide and kind of work on my introduction. So hi, everyone. Once again, my name is Lito. I'm a fifth-year architecture student over at the University of Notre Dame. I kind of dabbled my toes into themed entertainment. In the summer of 2019, I was able to work for Universal Creative on their hotels division. That was a lot of fun. Worked on some super cool hotels, Dockside and Surfside, which opened up just recently, and then some that are kind of in the works for the future. I've had a lot of fun just over the years exploring different parks. I've been blessed enough to visit all 6 international Disney parks. I've also met 309 different Disney characters. Sometimes big roller coasters and kind of a lot of thrilling rides kind of make me dizzy. So I'm kind of sit back and kind of enjoy the parks and for the smaller experiences. So just per se. So.
And I will say you glossed over it pretty quickly there, but going to every single 6, Magic Kingdom park style park is pretty. I'm impressed. Tell me my tracks, because I've not done that, and I'm close.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm a big international traveler. I spent all of my 3rd academic year in Rome, so just being able to travel. Obviously, that's been tough the past, I guess, year and some change to travel, but I'm excited now that I'm fully vaccinated and that things are kind of going in the right direction to eventually make it out to places in the next year or so. So I still haven't been to Alani. I've been on a cruise. I'm very seasick, so that might not be a thing I do again. But yeah, I'm excited to go to Alani very soon. My friend's getting married in Hawaii, so I'll probably make a stop there. Really cool.
So you went on a cruise and you did get seasick on the cruise?
Yeah, I was on one of the smaller ships. I think it was the Magic. We went on just a 3-day from Miami to the Bahamas, which is a very short distance.
Yeah.
Just geographically. And if there wasn't Thor and Spider-Man and Anna and Elsa kind of to distract me from the boat rocking, it would have been a very, very rough experience. I went on a bigger boat the year after, and I was pretty okay.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I don't even notice the boats moving. Like when I'm on the big cruise ships, I don't even notice it at all.
Really? Yeah. We were in the gondolas in Venice, and those are just little canals. It's very small, and I got seasick there. So I just I just get really bad motion sickness. It's more of a me problem.
Which one of the castle parks is? So you've been to all of them. Which one is your favorite?
Tokyo was definitely my favorite. We were there for, I think we had 4 days of just Disney, and there was definitely a million things that I haven't seen. There's a million little nooks and crannies I didn't get to explore. There's a bunch of experiences that I didn't get to do just because I didn't speak the language. There was some character dinings and some shows I wanted to see, but we couldn't call and make the reservations, for example. So there's I'd love to go back there for another 6-day trip and actually get to go to Osaka to see Universal, because we didn't see that either, because that's kind of a bit of a ways from Tokyo. But
Yeah, Tokyo Disneyland is it's a blend of like Magic Kingdom and Epcot in some ways, like with the architecture styles and the because they were built right around the same time, so it's really it's a really fun park. I've been in it several years, but totally fun.
Yeah, Disney Sea was also just amazing. It just every bit of architecture, just like different style that you can imagine, is just there, and it's just amazing how it just looks like a seamless, cohesive park, even though all the different lands are very just different and distinct from each other. So I thought that was super cool too.
Yeah, Tokyo's the only park that I haven't been to, Disney park. So,
okay,
I've not been to Shanghai. That was my plan.
I loved Shanghai Disneyland. I wish I could have I spent 3 days there, and I wish I could have spent more time there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Shanghai was fun. We went right after opening because my dad was on the opening team. He did OGs for attractions. So we went literally like a month after they opened, and a lot of things were still a little weird that they're still figuring their places and things, but it was a lot of fun. So
that's cool. Yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah, you talk about Tokyo Disney Sea. I don't know. I don't know if you're on architecture Twitter. You probably are, but there was a whole like post a building that has your energy kind of game. So I posted a sort of a themeparkguy.com behind the scenes sort of like reverse picture of Mount Prometheus and that whole attraction complex there. And like before I posted that, I had gotten like the number one, like the most likes I'd ever gotten on a tweet was like maybe 20. And this tweet got picked up by TDR Twitter, and I have over 300 likes on this one image that I posted.
Wild, yeah.
Just in the last 48 hours, I was just like, I could actually watch the ticker go up. I was just like, holy. Yeah. A lot of people hadn't seen that picture before, like from like the backstage angle of it, where you can see the dividing line between the Cape Cod rocks and the mysterious island rockwork. But
it's really so weird, cool. Like turning the corner and it looks completely different. And just as you go around that sort of island, it just doesn't look like that same volcano. I thought that was super cool.
I can't wait to go.
Yeah, I use the Tower of Terror from Tokyo as my building that describes your energy. I just love the Moorish style, like kind of how that's beautiful in that section of the park. One of my favorite things in Tokyo was the Duffy characters. I'm a big fan of the Duffy and Friends. So this guy kind of chills out on my desk every now and then. But he's my favorite. Loved going to Tokyo just to see these guys. Just
when I went to Shanghai and I stayed at the Disneyland Hotel and I had dinner at the fancy Cinderella restaurant up on the top of the hotel. I was by myself, and so I had a reservation for one. And I got to my table, and they had set up a place setting and a big gelatoni plush at my table, so that I had a dinner guest.
Oh my god!
And I did this series of photos in which gelatoni got progressively drunker as the evening went on.
Yeah, I left mine. Like I went to a dinner not knowing that people brought them like to dinner, and then they were like, "Oh, you can just borrow this one for photos." They just let me a gelatoni for the evening in I think it was Hong Kong when they did that, and I thought it was really cool and really funny.
It was just adorable.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we get to your presentation? I'm excited to dive into this.
So these are some of the kind of changes or kind of just things that have been addressed in the industry lately. And there was a lot of concern, a lot of question as to what these changes are about, why they're being made, why these sort of creative decisions were made in the first place. And I did a lot of research on it this summer because I was curious myself. There were some things that I didn't know. There were some things that I wanted to know more about, and et cetera. So I did a little research and found some things to kind of describe where the industry is going. So one thing that I mainly focused on was that art doesn't exist in a vacuum. What does that mean? So as designers, as creators, any biases that we have just in our daily lives or just in culture, just the things that we've gone through throughout the years, those biases and those beliefs definitely seep into different art forms. We've seen this time and time again in different animated mediums to be the most kind of prevalent. So as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of different animated movies there that kind of show some negative stereotypes. And I don't necessarily think that a lot of these creators were just outright racist, but they just have some biases towards different cultures and ethnic groups that were definitely outdated or definitely were never challenged by themselves. So they allowed these sort of beliefs and biases to kind of penetrate their art forms. I think a lot of us would agree that in other forms, some of these cartoons are rather beautiful and rather spectacular. But for these certain scenes in certain places, it might just be kind of uncomfortable for some people to watch.
That's
One
a good
thing
question.
that
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
go
Leo.
ahead, yeah.
Well, so you mentioned something like I think that like that's a big issue and problem that I think people have is being able to how to process things that we like or enjoyed or grew up with as a kid or an adult or whatever, and then finding out that hey, that's not that's problematic or that's insensitive, and like what do you do with the rest of that piece of art? You know, but
Yeah.
like Peter Pan, you know, there are some you know, insensitive depictions and stereotypes of, you know, indigenous people. And then, you know, Song of the South is a whole other bag of worms. But like,
Yeah.
how do you recommend trying to process that and you know, I don't know if you have any recommendations or any thoughts about that.
Yeah. So I would say that it's definitely not a right answer across the board. So there's some mediums and some art forms, and there's some productions that have definitely a lot more than others. For example, Aristocats. There's like one specific scene during the "Everybody Wants to Be a Cat" sign that's considered rather offensive. The rest of the movie makes very little to no reference to that scene, and it doesn't really play a sort of big part in that plot. So if you were to cut that scene out for general people to see it, it wouldn't change the movie at all, for the most part. If you take it a step further with things like Peter Pan, Native Americans that are in that film kind of play a pretty big role in a pretty big significant chunk of the movie. Um, that being said, there's not a lot of plot things that they do that kind of impact the story overall. The movie could be remade without them, or even with a more positive representation of them, and the plot of the whole plot as a whole wouldn't really change a lot. And then I guess the biggest extreme of that is Song of the South, where I'll kind of get into this a little bit more, where a lot of those racial themes are very prevalent and they're very strong and they're very pervasive in the whole art form in general. So it's definitely just there's not a right answer all the time. I think the best way to kind of move towards these art forms is to accept them for what they are and then kind of learn from them. Again, there's definitely extremes. For example, like Song of the South probably isn't for the best to be, you know, out there so for people to watch all the time without knowing about it. But I think the more people are educated on these things, it's the best way to enjoy them, personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be a big ask for Americans, especially to view things through a different glass, with subtlety and nuance and you know, sophistication, you know, and sensitivity, and realize, you know, that, you know, it almost 100 years ago, it was a very different time.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
culture was different. Cultural expression was different. You know, our culture, you know, a lot of our popular culture came from, you know, Black culture, not much in the way that it does now with the hip hop and R&B, and a lot of popular music is Black culture. And you know, there's, you know, I think there's similar things that are happening now, where there's some cultural appropriation things that are happening. And you know, again, it's like subtlety and nuance, and like Western culture and American culture, like American culture in particular, is not known for its subtlety and nuance and sophistication.
Yeah,
So it's hard. It's a big ask.
Well, and I don't think, you know, well, I want to be very clear that like bigotry is a lot different across the board. You know, it affects people in a lot of different ways and in different marginalized communities. And we know that, you know, the Black and African American and people of color are going through problems right now with all sorts of things. But like in our lifetime, it comes to mind of just, you know, same-sex marriage was illegal like within 5 years ago, and you look in media very clearly and say, okay, there were, you know, discrimination was, you know, was not equal rights. And in media, you can see very clearly how there were a lot of stereotypes and depictions, negative stereotypes, or flamboyant or over the top. And only very recently is there more well balanced in the media, you know. But it's a little bit different. But I think it's sometimes people may not be used to interacting with some marginalized groups. But some members of the LGBTQ plus community, that might be it's more spread apart. I'm not sure that makes any sense, but I think some people can wrap
perfect sense. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
just as time goes on and as more people have more exposure to different kinds of people, their perceptions of them change. So if you go back to the, you know, the different Disney films, I'm sure the creators of or the Aristocats, or maybe even Peter Pan, probably had little to no interaction with people who they misrepresented. They probably didn't
Yeah.
know anyone. They probably didn't go grocery shopping with them. They probably didn't know what they looked like. They just know from the very, minute stereotypes that were perverse in their culture. So that's why they represented them in that form. If you were
From
to make
other
Aristocats today,
from other stereotypes in film and television, it was like part of the broader
exactly, yeah,
culture. It was just
they're
like
continually perpetuated for sure.
Mhm.
And then what makes it even harder is that a lot of the films that we're discussing were made for children. So as generations grow up and kind of change, they're receiving those perceptions right out of the gate. So they're already kind of advanced and kind of ready to accept those stereotypes more and more willingly, just because they saw them growing up. So
yeah, I mean, I remember when I was very young, my grandfather bought a bunch of like dollar VHS tapes at like, a drugstore. And one of them was, several of them were like VHS tapes of Amos and Andy, which is a famously very, very racist cartoon, whole series of cartoons. And I watched them, and my parents let me watch them. It was just, you laugh at them and it's funny. And then like later on, I was just like, man, like I can't believe that like that was okay, just 40 years ago.
right,
Which
yeah.
is revealing my age somewhat, because like I was probably around 7 or 8 years old when I was watching those, and it was I didn't see them as any different than like the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies or Tom and Jerry that I was watching, at the same time. I didn't know any better. My family didn't know any better.
Right.
Most
Yeah,
people didn't.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the best representation of how to kind of grow and change with these were kind of anytime you kind of popped in one of those old Warner Brothers cartoons that were considered offensive, at least as I was growing up, Whoopi Goldberg, excuse me, would come on the TV and kind of tell you why these cartoons, what they were, what they originally were about, like why they became offensive, why they're considered offensive now, and then kind of why we're showing them to you now. So on the screen, you'll see a classic Warner Brothers disclaimer before Whoopi kind of had her introduction and kind of her cultural exchange with the kind of mediums, kind of explaining why the cartoons were the way they were. I think this is a great way to kind of share these cartoons and kind of share this animation with younger generations. I think the tough part comes into is parents who don't know that these warnings are coming or kind of aren't expecting them and have to warrant this conversation of race that they might not be prepared to have or they might not agree with having with a small child. So I think kind of determining when that counter discussion happens with a child is also a big struggle as we move forward with these warnings as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen that disclaimer before. It's actually really great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I grew up in the 90s and was, Looney Tunes was on Nickelodeon. No disclaimers. We're not, at least in the 90s, there was nothing like this. So I think this is probably, 2000 or so, and it kind of begs the question, of like, how much do we keep preserving and showing versus trying to watch new programming that is a little bit more evolved, But what we will find is that even in shows that I grew up with that were probably new and fresh and maybe had a diverse cast, even those have problems with have problems. It's because it's every generation. Like, and I know that like the way we talk about, or at least I talk, I'm sure I'm gonna make mistakes and we're gonna fumble. And the art that I produced has had problems with it too. I think it's all about trying to strive to do a little bit better. But no, it's great to point out that it's been made aware, and now we're just figuring out what do we do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important for people to grow and educate from these sort of mediums, but I also think that it's important that we uplift stories that have better representation or might be created by people that are being misrepresented. So in the future, we don't misrepresent them again. So it's definitely a balance between the two of knowing what was insensitive and kind of learning what is a positive representation. So a healthy balance between the two is definitely acceptable. But just how to navigate that is definitely the question now.
Well, that and bringing these formerly marginalized voices to the table at the very beginning of projects and having them part of the creative process, and normalizing representation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I know
from the get-go. Yeah.
Well, and I think that like that we can avoid these pitfalls by having diverse sets of people in a room and everything, background, education, skill set, and so that everybody has point of views that are different. And of course, check out Big Break Foundation for more information, at least what we're doing with themed entertainment. But what comes next? So there's been a history of making updates, right, to attractions. This isn't
Yeah, so in the medium of theme parks, it doesn't make sense to kind of display this warning that says, "Hey, this was designed at a time when these stereotypes were offensive." Theme park attractions have attractions that have hundreds, maybe thousands of guests an hour, and to take a good 3 minutes of that experience to kind of say, "Hey, this is bad, learn from it," doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, in a lot of theme park examples, we've seen that these rides evolve over time since they're kind of being displayed as current events, even if they were created in the past, if that makes sense. So the biggest example of things that have kind of evolved over time is Pirates of the Caribbean. There's been some incredibly negative perceptions of women and a lot of sexist misrepresentations in the attraction as it's evolved. In the bottom right corner, you can kind of see the pooped pirate, which was the initial interpretation of that pirate in that scene. He's holding a garter, and there's a woman hiding in a barrel, and I think you can add two and two together as to what's going on there and why that scene doesn't exist anymore. It's evolved, I think, twice. I think it became the gluttonous pirate, so he was eating food, and there was a bug in the canister for a while, and now Jack Sparrow's in there, and he's looking at a treasure map. And then the most popular and probably the most notable for people in my generation is probably the redhead scene. That's changed once in stateside and in Paris, I think, as well. They've changed it too, to kind of show that, hey, maybe human trafficking isn't something to be joked about.
Right. I can't remember. I haven't been on Pirates in like over a year now, obviously. But there's some Chinese characters on the other side of that scene, on the right-hand side, on the steps. I wonder if those have been changed at all, or will be.
I wonder, especially with Disney's fifth key inclusion. They're still this. They look the same on our coast from last time I wrote it.
And I remember, like, I think that the first thing I ever heard of, when that may be just because I was a little more cognizant, was in the 90s. They did adjustments to the scenes where women were being chased around. So they sometimes they switched it around, at least in the domestically. I think other ways they didn't. But it's like men are no longer just chasing the woman, or the women are holding food in their hand, and or the women are chasing the men for laughs. So it was they switched that around to become less centered around sexual assault. To be very honest.
Yeah, I think in Florida, all of the pirates are being chased, and then at Disneyland, there's like one or two pirates that are chasing food. And then there's another set of pirates that they're now holding treasure chests, and they're not chasing anyone. So that's been changed too. And I think Paris, they're sword fighting. They never chased anyone there. Interesting. But Tokyo, all that stuff still kind of happens. Just runs wild. So I'll kind of get into that kind of at the end, but why that sort of thing exists. But there was another image on there that I showed of an attraction over in Efteling, over in the Netherlands. When I was traveling abroad, I was super excited to kind of visit Efteling because I'm a big dark rides person. They have a lot of fun dark rides, but they kind of have their own version of It's a Small World, where they kind of represent different cultures and kind of go around the world in the same vein as the Small World. And they have some negative representations of some Asian Americans, and there was some of African Americans and Black people also in the attraction. These have since been edited out, but I remember riding the attraction and I was just very, very freaked out by it and very strange. And it's probably the only person of color in a theme park in the middle of the Netherlands. These definitely they've just never been reconciled with. I think they were changed just after I visited. I visited in 2018 and they've since been changed. But I thought those were super interesting as well.
I was there in July of 2019 and they were still there.
Oh, they were still there then? Okay, so it must have been really good.
I saw them too, and I was just like, oh boy.
Yeah, and I definitely knew that I was the only like brown person in that entire park on a cold December morning, and they just don't have no idea. That's just they probably don't interact with people of color all the time in the Netherlands. So,
not what we want.
But I guess, how did we get here? How did we go? Like, how did these forms of art be created? How do we learn from these things? But if you can flip to the next slide really quickly. Thank you so much. This disclaimer above the Enter Disneyland kind of sets the stage as kind of the thesis statement for Disneyland, if you will. And it states that here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. Because Disneyland opened in 1955, this vision of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy explicitly excluded conversation of race and gender. If you want to put 1955 into like a time period or in time perspective, the civil rights movement didn't pass until I want to say 9 years later in 1964, and women still did not have the right to vote, just for a frame of reference of things. So when you look at the original attraction lineup for Disneyland, a lot of the roles and attractions were gendered. So in the Jungle Cruise, only men were skippers. The Indian war canoes, as they were originally called, were also only piloted by Indian men. And then drivers of like the different trains and the omnibuses and the mainstream vehicles were also only done by men, just because that's what society was reflected, and they didn't want to kind of discuss why a woman would do it, because we're trying to escape away from these complex conversations and topics. Alternatively, women were able to pilot the storybook land canal boats, and that was kind of their only exclusive role as well. It's interesting to note that these kind of attractions and gender separations, I'm not sure if they ever existed on the East Coast, but they existed on the West Coast until 1995. So they existed for about 40 years. It was when a bunch of cast members from Disneyland traveled to the East Coast and were like, hey, there's girls piloting these Jungle Cruise boats. Why can't we do that? And then they're like, I don't know. So then they changed the rule, which is super interesting and super strange to me.
No good reason we can think of. So shoot.
Yeah.
In Disney, I mean, Disney's definitely made headway, or at least made headlines over the years about costume requirements, and that everyone's a cast member, and so they have to meet some sort of role. And there was a long time. This is before I worked there, right? But you could not go up to a certain size in costume. You had to cut weight to be the role. So they were in deep on this, and I think we would all agree that they've made a lot of progress. I mean, good credit for kids too, at least with humans, maybe not animatronics or attractions, but they've made some very serious moves over the year with the people, and making accommodations, whether for religious reasons or whatever it needs to be, about welcoming all shapes and people of backgrounds to be wherever they want to be, which is progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was kind of researching, I was always wondering if Disneyland ever was segregated, because there was a brief period of 9 years when legally they could have been segregated. California kind of did away with segregation in 1955, so it was kind of a non-issue by then. But because of that, kind of upholding that perception of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy, a lot of people of color had roles that were explicitly backstage or back of house roles. So you wouldn't see a Black person kind of operating the teacups or Mr. Toad's Wild Ride or things like that. You'd see them preparing food kind of in the back of house areas, or kind of working custodial roles back of house. So I thought that was super interesting too. But because of just the perceptions of Disneyland and media, with like the Disneyland TV show, for example, and just Disneyland's location, a lot of people of color didn't have access to Disneyland. Just the times and just the way things were. A lot of people of color living in California did not have access to a motor vehicle, and Anaheim was never connected to like the Los Angeles greater transportation system, so they didn't really have access to the park for a good long time.
Can you imagine if there were pictures of whites only bathrooms and water fountains in Disneyland? Like, if that exists, man,
terrible.
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, because at a certain point we kind of bridge up against socioeconomic barriers, and that kind of segregation, which I would definitely say that, there was still that, people who are on stage when I worked there were younger, probably a little bit more, there for the magic. And then you have people who are working more back of house or the overnight shift, who are from a different socioeconomic background. It definitely could feel that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of it's like Robert Moses building the bridges too short so that the public buses couldn't get to the Long Island beaches.
Yeah. That kind of leads perfectly into the next slide I had, was when Epcot was being designed around the 1960s, late 60s. One of the discussions was segregation. Florida's located in the Deep South, technically, at the time. So segregation was still alive and well up until the 1964, and housing segregation, still pervades in the South much long after the civil rights movement had already been passed. So one of the big hot topics when designing Epcot was, do we segregate? Do we not segregate? Do we force people to live together? What does that look like? And one of the small factors that kind of led to Epcot's original demise was that Disney did not want to be in the business of forcing segregation or allowing segregation. So that was sort of one of the downsides of designing a city in Florida, was, how do we segregate it? Do we segregate it? Why don't we? Just that complex conversation was definitely one that Disney did not want to be a part of, for sure, even if they didn't know how to reconcile with it.
That's tough. I'm never looking at it again the same.
Yeah, it was definitely just an interesting conversation as to what do we do, and no one really had the answers. I kind of hope that some of the people that I enjoyed who designed Epcot, I kind of don't want to know their position on it, whether they're pro or against, but I kind of do, just to know like what stage of discussion points that whole segregation topic happened, because there's not a lot of research on it out there. But when kind of discussing who worked at Disneyland, kind of going back to that topic, there was one major exception to that sort of Black people kind of working back houses, and that was right in Frontierland. There was a sponsored attraction called Aunt Jemima's Pancake House. So a lot of us know that Disneyland opened with a lot of debt, so they needed as many sponsorships as they could to kind of keep the bill kind of working and kind of keep it financially stable. And one of the sponsorships was from Aunt Jemima, the pancake company. So to kind of have that sponsorship, they would have a Black actress dress up and kind of serve pancakes to the guests and kind of make some memories of some sorts. This kind of became apparent in kind of after the George Floyd protests, that Aunt Jemima was based off of a slave, which I didn't actually know going in until people were kind of discussing it. When you kind of hear the phrase Jemima, it comes from the phrase not Jemima, which would be a slave. And a lot of slaves were kind of kids of the families who owned the slaves referred to them as aunt and uncle, which we'll kind of talk about when we talk about Splash Mountain as well. So I didn't actually know that she was a slave, but it's definitely interesting and kind of uncomfortable to know that Disneyland's first African-American face character was Aunt Jemima. And we wouldn't see another one really until Hercules premiered and you'd see them used in the parade. So there was a big gap in history as to Black representation in the parks, for sure.
Did you find anything about blackface being done here?
I didn't see any examples of it. There's a family associated with Aunt Jemima. There's a whole kind of estate sort of thing that's set up. So I wouldn't imagine if blackface would kind of take place to kind of have that sort of thing. I think because there weren't that many actresses that performed Aunt Jemima. There was only like 3 or 4 that were documented. It wasn't like a large cast of characters. So like if you were to visit Tiana in the parks, there's definitely a lot of friends that she has that kind of helps her out with that role. I don't think there were that many for Aunt Jemima's Pancake House. So I don't think there are any records of blackface that I could find.
Yikes. No, all good. What have we got next? I mean, not all good.
I think the next kind of down the street from where you could find the Pancake House was the Indian Village. There was an attraction kind of where Critter Country is, where they would kind of display some different Native American culture and kind of some celebrations of that sort of talking points. In many ways, it was kind of progressive and kind of displaying classic Indian artifacts and kind of art, which was definitely not characteristic for the era. But there were some issues with kind of the nomenclature and how they were describing this attraction. So if you opened a Disneyland guidebook from 1955, it would say that they would have full-blooded Indians on display, and that's a quote from the book itself. There's definitely some reconciles with kind of displaying different ethnic groups as on display. And there's also some negative perceptions kind of in other nomenclature. So in the restrooms, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but they labeled the restrooms as Braves and Squaw, which nowadays are kind of negative representations of Native American indigenous populations. Again, this is now Critter Country and Bear Country. So a different cultural stereotype took its place much later. But that's sort of how we reconcile with Native Americans in early Disneyland. If you went over to Fantasyland, though, you'd see a very different representation.
May I provide one comment? So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm actually a quarter Indian. So my mom, it's my mom's side of the family is First Nations from Canada and all that. So I'm pretty, generally pretty in tune with different, some of the stuff and So anyways, I feel free to speak on this a little bit because my grandma was and went through some horrible thing, especially in Canada. They did really horrendous things to, well, we don't have to get dark, but they did a lot of horrible things. Just as they did in the United States. And, one thing about these types of presentations is, you mentioned that it was a little progressive, and there is lines of thinking out there about, being able to showcase one's culture. If you're the ones doing it, we probably could have a lot of conversations about full-blooded Indians and on display and all that. But it has been a thing in theme parks to showcase cultures in a way. And also, I'm not sure if Knott's Berry Farm does this, but I think like when I was a kid, they built a whole an Indian area where they started doing. They may have replaced it since then, but they would have ceremonial. Presentations, and right. It's kind of this thing of like, okay, it's not necessarily all bad, it's a discussion about exploitation versus cultural heritage and showcasing it off, because there's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but depending on what it is, what's the power dynamic of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just like I got to something that it's complicated. It's very complicated when you start getting into Native Americans or Indigenous First Nations people and how they're presented in the public.
Yeah, I think a different representation of how you positively represent different cultures in a theme park. Epcot's definitely the best example. In a very similar context, they kind of refer to their cast members as like cultural representations or cultural representatives or cultural ambassadors. And in theory, they mean the same thing, but one is very different. They're very different in how you describe it. Like the purpose of having the Native Americans in that culture was to kind of display that culture, but we're not describing the cast members at Epcot as full-blooded Japanese cast members per se. So that's kind of the different dichotomy of that sort of thing, and I'll kind of get into that a bit later too.
So we have the way that they Indian Village, and then what happened in Fantasyland?
So in Fantasyland, many of us have seen Peter Pan. So the negative perceptions and the negative representations of Native Americans exist in the attraction from opening day to this day. They're definitely downplayed a lot. They don't play a big role in the attraction. They're just there. I think when I went on the Shanghai one, they were not in the attraction. There might have been some teepees, but I don't think there was any sort of figurines representing them, which I definitely see them as probably the next kind of topic of inclusion that Disneyland's going to address in the future, for sure. But
yeah, there's a lot of it's basically a very racist caricature of what we're looking at here. Just people are not aware of the facial structure.
Along the same vein as a minstrel show character, just different ethnicity, sort of very negative perceptions of.
Yeah, and the red noses indicating like drunkenness. As if the American Indians are always drunk.
Yeah, there was another perception of the song. I think they say that they're red per se because of bashfulness, and obviously that's nowhere near the truth. But
I've not watched Peter Pan probably since I was a kid, and I'm kind of scared too.
And I know my mom, like she watched. I remember she watched it with me. She was like, "Wait, this is bad," and then she got rid of the DVD. So I don't remember really watching that movie a lot growing up, honestly. But back over in Adventureland, there are some very similar but very different misrepresentations that still kind of pervasive in the attraction. When I made this PowerPoint, it was before they kind of made another step on the East Coast. But Jungle Cruise kind of has a little bit of negative perceptions of some indigenous populations in the attraction. They kind of portray all of the human characters as kind of savages. And a lot of these characters are of South Asian or Pacific Islander or African descent. They kind of portray them as savages. They kind of portray them as uncivilized. And they kind of exploit sort of some of the negative stereotypes of their culture. So I know a big topic of discussion when discussing removing them was, didn't they actually have headhunters in African culture or in whatever culture? And I think it's interesting that the reason why we're asking these questions is because this is our only representation of them in the media. We perceive them on TV or in movies or in media as these violent, savage headhunters. So we don't question why they would be represented that way in an attraction, which is super uncomfortable and super interesting to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. These scenes they're making changes, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
this is probably some of the most on the nose. No questions, not the way we want to present. Especially when you go up against, you look at Africa and Animal Kingdom, the way that things are depicted there. And also, and that's nothing to say about colonialism and fetishism of these cultures and exotic. And, you don't have to scratch the surface too far on these to realize that this is not where this is not the best way to do things here.
We talked a little bit about blackface earlier and representation like that. I want to put up a picture a friend of mine just sent me regarding the representation of Native people at Disneyland. And that's an image that I'd never seen before with a shirt, that I've never seen before. And that's
wild.
I think it's 1958.
Yeah, that's right on the nose. That makes sense.
Wow.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, me either.
That's interesting.
Thanks to Damien for sending that to me.
Yeah, super bummer. I mean, I was gonna make a joke about that being part of somebody's personal collection, but it's just so terrible. That's not what we want, right? No, not what we want. But we talked about indigenous people, and we did have a viewer question. I've not seen this movie, but off topic, for those who've seen Parasite, what are your thoughts on the rich's kid's son interested in Native Americans? Now, I don't know if Riches is the last name of the family or if they're
No,
wealthy.
no, it's a rich, wealthy family in South Korea. Um, uh, Lito, have you seen it? Do you know what we're talking
I've
about?
never seen Parasite before,
Okay,
so
so I've seen it, and it's one of the best films I've ever seen. It's absolutely an incredible film.
you got to explain it to us, then we can comment on it.
yeah, please
I,
explain.
I'm not. I don't want to give too much away, but it is a it is sort of like a class war allegory, and maybe not so allegory. It's like very on the surface kind of thing, where a poor family moves into the basement level of a rich family's, or slowly moves into and replaces a rich family. And one of the kids in the rich family is obsessed with Native American culture from, North America. And I don't know, I took that as being like the ignorance of the rich, and the um sort of ignorance of lack of cultural sensitivity, maybe. And also because it was like, kind of warlike representation as well. um this sort of like false impression of like some sort of virulent masculinity that's imparted with, Indian warriors and things like that, so Native American warriors. I don't know, I don't think that there was too much beyond that, but I could be wrong. That's how I read into it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I've never seen the film before, but I definitely think that there's a difference between a healthy appreciation and an appropriation. I
Yeah.
think once you sort of accept other cultures as your own and you kind of create yourself to be an expert of that culture, I think that's where I draw the line for me. But I definitely think that people should definitely be more willing and definitely be more curious about other cultures. But I definitely think there should be a bit of sensitivity and just a bit of acceptance towards those cultures. And I think you could easily cross an imaginary line of insensitivity very easily. So it's just a very fine line to kind of be aware of, for sure.
Yeah, one thing that comes up a lot is now that we're talking about Native Americans or First Nations, it's like there's a lot of art pieces out there and sculptures, and my parents live in Sedona, Arizona, and it's all about that. Like, and and sometimes I'm like uncomfortable with it, like just like all the artwork and this, and it's like, okay, you're appreciating it, but it feels kind of exploitative to me, kind of, depending on like, was this, unless like, depends on where it's coming from. Is this a First Nations person creating artwork that wanted to share it? That's a lot different than, let's just say, a white person creating artwork of Native American. That to me is like that's not good. Like, no, just full stop. Do not do that. But if people want to choose to represent their culture or keep it alive, like, I want them to be in the driver's seat. That may not have nothing to do with what the question was, but it was just maybe think of that. And so we had a tweet come in. I just want to clear. John, a friend of the show, the Indian camp scene wasn't in the original 1955 ride. It was added in 1983. That's the next revision from my sources. So during the Fantasyland redo, I guess. So that was revised.
Okay.
That's kind of worse. That doesn't make it better.
I wonder if they were in the original version in Disney World as well, because I know they made those changes in the 83 to kind of reflect the advances and kind of the things they learned when they built it on the East Coast. So I wonder if they were in it from the original on our side of the coast. That's interesting. I know that.
Yikes. Well, thanks for saying that in, John. And also, Damien, thanks for saying that in. And then, of course, thanks for the question. We appreciate the collaboration. We are live, coast to coast, folks. So we're happy to take that as it comes. What's up next, Lito?
I think I just had an image of kind of where Jungle Cruise is kind of heading in its next evolution, its next phase. In kind of the same vein as what the tweet had, there were some scenes. I don't think that there actually had the indigenous peoples in every scene in this misrepresentation when Jungle Cruise opened in 55 either, to be honest with you. I think some of these scenes, Jungle Cruise evolved over time from this kind of documentary style attraction to kind of this more comedic one. And that's kind of where some of these culturally insensitive roles came from anyway. So that's actually pretty interesting that the tweet was brought up. Thank you so much for that. But as we kind of discussed, I don't think every theme park attraction kind of has to do this duty of kind of explaining and showcasing culture all of the time. Because if we had that, then it would be a very mixed bag of kind of what attraction would be, and we wouldn't be able to tell every story correctly. So I guess the best example that I have of that is over in Animal Kingdom, which we kind of hinted on earlier. If you want to flip to the next one, Harambe and Anandapur over in Animal Kingdom are perfect representations of how to represent culture in a respectful manner, but not have culture be the showcase of the attraction. So when you think of culture and attraction, I think Epcot Pavilions. These things are meant to educate people on Mexican culture, Norwegian culture, Chinese culture, etc. But when you go to Animal Kingdom, yes, you're there for the Africa, but you're there to see the animals. You're there to see the different animals that these two locales have, but they have a really respectful kind of discussion of these cultures. And it's still a wonderful way to kind of explore these worlds. There's still some Disney magic in there too. Like Festival of the Lion King is over in Africa. And then you can see, I think, the up characters over in the Asia section. So it's very respectful of the culture, but still the culture itself is not the star of the show. So yes, you can have your cake and eat it too, for sure, when it comes to discussing culture.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting angle. Well, we get, when we start having this kind of discussions, the immediate thing to do is to say, well, if we can't showcase this culture, then we should just stop showcasing everything, and everything has to go out. And it's kind of like an immediate, I'd say it's kind of a defense mechanism where you want to be like, well, it's kind of like a slippery slope. Where does it going to end? And I think it's very clear that like we're talking about like caricatures and stereotypical presentations of cultures. I bet we could call it a representation of cultures. It's not about going through and destroying the Japan pavilion. There are the layers to it too. It's like, okay, is this a marginalized community that we're talking about, and what is the history behind that? Because showing a German pavilion is a lot different than showcasing oceanic cultures or Polynesian cultures that had to do with colonization versus Japan versus China. Like those are all important nuances that have to be factored in, and it starts to get a little complex. And it's like, oh, we have to think about this. Luckily, people who have done a lot of thinking about it have done the thought about it. So it's like I'm trying to like warn people to not get too shocked when they start to see things falling away, because it's not like out of nowhere. It's like it's very well documented. There's problematics. It's problematic, right? So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Lito?
I think the perfect example of kind of how to reconcile with these sort of cultural differences and kind of how to move forward is Kilimanjaro Safaris. Kilimanjaro Safaris has people from different perceptions, different walks of life on, as a protagonist role and an antagonist role. We probably don't see it as much anymore because they've kind of worked out all the storyline aspects of Kilimanjaro. When they opened, you had the warden kind of protecting the land. And you also had a storyline with poachers. And those two dichotomies didn't fully represent the African people. And that's okay. We're still able to have villains that live in this culture. We're still able to have heroes that live in this culture. But the problem lies when you rely exclusively on stereotypes that kind of portray different cultures and different groups. And Kilimanjaro Safaris never relied on that to kind of tell its story. It was able to tell a fantastic story about conservation without relying on some heinous, uncivilized, outdated stereotypes to kind of create that narrative.
Right. And that's the thing. What's interesting is like, the point of view of what a story is being told, when it's from a colonial atmosphere, like, oh, these are, we're going to other this culture versus we're going to transport you here and you're going to be able to see the cultures themselves within it. Like, I think I think they did an excellent job at Animal Kingdom in showcasing at least, I don't want to say it's a slightly romanticized version of it, but, not to the point of like, whitewashing or negatively stereotyping or just completely erasing a culture,
Yeah, there's also not too many reliances on colonization, which definitely took place in those two locales. There's not an over-reliance on, European cultures in a different locale in those areas either. So which is super important and super awesome.
So now we know that, in the news and the media, we've heard a lot of new updates that are coming out there, right? Some of our favorite books. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So when I was discussing these theme park nuances of race and gender, I was wondering, why am I only looking at Disney things? Disney had a 40-year head start in the theme park, and 40-year head start in the theme park industry. We didn't see any other theme parks that sort of dealt with a lot of storytelling until we saw Seuss Landing, or until we saw Universal. So Universal kind of enters the game in 1990. A lot of different cultural representations have been evolved. They weren't necessarily all figured out at the time, but they kind of evolved over time. So we see Seuss Landing. A popular talking point when it comes to these sort of, do we enjoy this medium or do we not, was Dr. Seuss. I've been aware of some of Dr. Seuss's negative representations of different ethnic groups for years. And the question's always been, where do we draw the line at Dr. Seuss? Was bad, or why racism was bad. Ooh, looks like I'm back. So there's, Dr. Seuss is a very nuanced author in that respect. Thank God when Universal Creative designed Seuss Landing that not a lot of these perceptions made it into the attractions. So as we know, on Dr. Seuss's birthday, they announced that they'd be taking 6 books out of production. And none of these 6 books really have a large presence in the land, except for If I Ran the Zoo. I wasn't able to walk through the attraction last time I was there because it's been closed because of COVID. But from what I remember, I don't remember any negative perceptions of different people and groups in the If I Ran the Zoo playground. So even if Universal were to kind of rewrite these narratives, it would be a very easy fix to do. A lot of just name changes, a lot of just different, different names for things. It would be pretty easy to fix and kind of change. But I mean, Dr. Seuss is a big talking point in the past month or so, just kind of discussing what do we do with racial sensitivity. As I made this presentation, when I told it the first time, this was something that I definitely left out, and I've definitely learned a lot more about, was the Quickie Mart over in the Springfield section over in Universal Studios Florida, and I think Hollywood has their own version of it as well. Yeah. The Quickie Mart kind of has a big negative portrayal of South Asian Americans in this country. There's a really wonderful documentary called The Problem with Apu. If you have HBO Max, it's on there, that I've seen about it. And that kind of discusses, the issues that the South Asian community has had with this character on The Simpsons. The biggest discussion point when it comes to The Simpsons is that The Simpsons makes fun of everyone. So why is Apu always singled out? And I think the talking point that they've discussed was when The Simpsons was coming out, there was little to no representation of South Asians in media. The exception was Apu. So when you saw Apu in the media, this is how you assumed all Indians and all South Asians were to be. It's different from when you have Luigi, the man who runs the pizza restaurant, kind of speaking in a very broken, very thick, very stereotypical Italian accent, where you can see 7, 8, 9, 10 different representations of Italians in the media, so you know that this is not how Italians are always portrayed. A similar discussion happened with Bumblebee Man in the documentary, but there was definitely less of a talking point because the documentary was mainly focused on Apu. But there was definitely some stereotypes that The Simpsons has had to deal with over the years, and I'm curious to know if Disney's purchase of The Simpsons, Disney's kind of creation, kind of production of The Simpsons will kind of affect that. I know that Dan Castellaneta has stepped down from voicing Apu, but I think he's going to continue being on the show in more of a recurring or background capacity.
Not correct, but it was Hank Azaria, and he,
okay.
he, there were calls to him to not, make that voice, and I mean, and I want to be honest, like I definitely, these are things that have come out over the years where I've been like, come on, and this is like, a year and a half ago. And now I'm totally like, oh no, like, yikes, that's not really what we want to do. And so it's like, if you're out there watching and you're like, it's okay. It's a process, of coming to terms with all this kind of stuff. And I thought we had a really great comment from Damien come up, which is to say, you don't have to wait for someone to be offended before recognizing progression and evolution is necessary. We don't live in the past when it comes to science. Why should cultural understanding be any different? Frame that, tweet that. I will retweet that because that is a brilliant comment, Damien. It's so true. People know that these have been problems for a long time.
Absolutely.
It's just there hasn't been this big push or budget to change it, and when it comes to Dr. Seuss, there's no way that attraction can stay like that. They can keep If I Ran the Zoo. They're gonna either rebrand it, whatever they need to do. That's not a big deal. That's nothing in comparing to the big daddy of all re-themes and attractions, right? What's the big one announced that was kind of took very quickly after
it kind of I was very surprised that they announced that this change was even coming. I think
they were too.
Yeah, it was definitely a welcome change. My mom was surprised too. She was like, "There's no way that they're going to do that." Because I remember when the petition came out, my mom was like, "There's no way they're going to give that princess a whole e-ticket," and then they did. Right in the midst of all all of the protests and kind of reaction to sort of different changes in society, they announced that Splash Mountain would be closing pretty soon. So if you can flip to the next slide. Splash Mountain opened in 1989, a long time after Song of the South sort of premiered, kind of as like we have all these different animatronics, let's put them to good use. As you can see in the photos, I've enjoyed Splash Mountain before. I've been on the attraction. We've all ridden it. We've all had our moments on the attraction. So definitely as you learn more about things, it's okay to change and grow as you sort of learn new information or present it with new information. I've been on all 3 Splash Mountains and thought they were a lot of fun. And as you can see there, I am as a little kid hugging Brer Rabbit. I think I thought he was Thumper because I'm holding a Thumper. So I don't even know who he was. I was too little to ride Splash Mountain anyway. But I saw them just before the shutdown happened at a special event. But yeah, it was definitely an attraction that I loved a lot. But the more I learned about the film and the more I learned about what it was about, the more I was uncomfortable with it. So Song of the South came out in 1946. As many people my age knows, that it's pretty much hard to find. I saw it after I visited a Civil War reenactment, which is what you do when you live in the South. I found it on a bootleg video and I purchased it because I'd never seen it before. I was curious to know what it was about. And I was incredibly uncomfortable with its portrayals of different cultural groups. So the stories are based off of Uncle Remus, which is a collection of different folk tales that were told by Southern Black Americans. These stories were told orally from different person to person. Eventually, one of the kids of someone who owned the slaves took all these stories and wrote them down and then published a book, and then Disney made a movie off of the book. In the stories, there's Uncle Remus is trying to tell a young white boy that you can't run away from your problems and that there's no place like home. And he tells this story through animated sequences in the film. If you were to watch the film and just seeing what it's all about, you would be unsure as to whether Uncle Remus was a slave. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of children referred to their slaves as uncle or aunt. So him just referring to that kind of trips you off. The film's actually set after the Civil War, so it's set in Reconstruction era, and Uncle Remus and all the other characters are actually servants and they're not slaves in a way. But again, you wouldn't know that because there's no mention of slavery. There's no mention that they aren't slavery. There's no like, oh, it's in this time period, so it's after the Civil War. You wouldn't know it just by watching the film. Because of that, it makes it look like Uncle Remus and all of the other Black characters are there because they want to be, and that they're having a lot of fun kind of in this slavery environment. They look like they're having a grand old time, which very clearly is not what happened during slavery. When Splash Mountain opened many years later, there's no humans in the attraction. The only humans are the cast members pushing the buttons. So that whole topic of slavery is kind of taken out of the conversation. But what is a major thing for me that was kind of confusing to me was that the film's last showing publicly was in 1986. This was before home media happened. So if you needed to see these films again and again and again, you have to go to the theater to see a reissue or a re-release to see them. But they stopped showing in 1986 and it finally was locked away in the Disney Vault, I want to say not much long after that. So I definitely think it's very interesting that they would build this large e-ticket attraction based off of a film that people couldn't watch anymore. And it makes sense because 1989, 1986, there definitely was some time differences. There probably was pulled from, circulation while Splash Mountain was already in development in Disneyland, but then it opened 2 more iterations by 92 over on the East Coast and over in Japan.
Yeah, I remember, growing up as a kid, and they would package the Song of the South cartoons with Brer Rabbit and Brer Bear and Brer Fox completely separately. So I was very familiar with it, and I don't know if when they cut out the Tar Baby and those scenes, but to me it was like it was a part of these package deals. Like they watched it on the Disney Channel and be like, oh, cool, it's it's this and that. This has been a thing where, even just as recently, it's like it takes a lot of thought of like, well, is it so separated enough? Is it this, that, and the other? And then like after I had
interesting
cut.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy because the plot of the movie is essentially Uncle Remus trying to tell this child that, you can't run away from your problems. There's no place like home. That message is very uncomfortable coming from a slave where they didn't really have a choice to leave. There was no, don't leave. There was no decision. You couldn't leave. You didn't have the option. There was really no place like home because there was no other place for you. Unfortunately, that theme of staying home and home sweet home is the lesson today. is the central theme of the attraction itself. Granted,
Mhm.
that message is coming from, you know, an animated frog. It's a very different message, so you don't have that kind of issue of slavery, but that same message of staying home is the perfect place for you is still pervasive in the attraction. I've all of the different cartoon sequences, there's different ways they kind of describe that, like you mentioned the tar baby sequence, but you know, that pervasive theme taken from someone you might perceive as a slave is rather dangerous. So yeah, out on the screen, it kind of depicted the tar baby scene. A lot of people might be aware that a tar baby is a very common racial trope and a racial slur towards Black people. And when they kind of dealt with this scene, developing it for the attraction, they recognized that this was offensive and they covered it up with the beehive scene. It's the same sort of plot. They trap him in something and he gets sucked. There's just not the racial trope sort of thrown in the attraction.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, they knew I mean, like, it's like that was a bridge too far for them. They knew that the whole thing was problematic, but they're like, "Okay, we have to draw the line here."
Yeah.
Coming back to if you're watching, you could have just removed any, any scene with goop in it, and we would have been a little bit better, But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's also a very, very different misrepresentation of culture also in the attraction, and I'm sure all of us have loved this song to pieces. But Zippity Doo Dah is it's a song kind of based in nonsense, much like Bippity Boppity Boo or Chim Chim Cheree, where you just kind of say words in a fashion. When it came to Song of the South, they've looked to a minstrel show song to kind of develop that words of nonsense. So Zip Coon was a popular minstrel show character, and if anyone does not know what a minstrel show is, it's when white people would paint themselves in blackface and they would use a lot of vernacular Black English and a lot of different stereotypes and kind of portray a comedic show. It's like Hoop Doo Doo Review if it was incredibly racist. Is kind of the best way to describe it. And one of the songs that they would sing in this kind of caricature was called Zip Coon, and this is kind of an excerpt of the song, so you can kind of see the similarities. I played it on YouTube once, and it sounds very similar to Zippity Doo Dah. So after the show, if you guys want to play that just for yourself, it sounds very similar to Zippity Doo Dah, and it makes you, when you hear the song elsewhere, you can't unhear it. So this sort of connection kind of also is still pervasive in the attraction and in some other instances of the park. So I know Disneyland just opened a new parade just before the shutdown. Zippity Doo Dah is pervasive in that song. So yeah, what's the comment? Long song. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that some of the sequences were still in a VHS tape. Interesting.
What I will say is, thanks for explaining what a minstrel show. I was Googling it, like, should I know that? Okay, apparently it's a little bit more obscure. So this is horrifying. Like, I hate hearing all this. It's like, my gosh.
That's why all the animated characters wear white gloves too, is from minstrel shows. Like Mickey wears white gloves because that's what they did in minstrel shows.
Interesting. I didn't know that either. I just thought it was because hands were easier to draw with gloves on.
No, they were, all the Disney characters, all those old designs, those U-By-Works designs, with the rubber hose animations, they're all black. I mean, Mickey is. I mean, the argument can be made that Mickey is a minstrel show character in blackface with the white design and the black and white. And the white gloves. All the characters wear white gloves because it's all this vaudeville minstrel show kind of derivative.
Yeah, I know also connections have been made between minstrel shows and some stereotypes in animation. So the big one was the Apu one. Instead of painting Hank Azaria in, brown face and wearing a store clerk outfit, he draws it, or it's drawn by someone else, and he does the voice, and it's very similar to a minstrel show. And, the purpose of Apu is not to tell this interesting story about South Asian, Desi communities. It's to make fun of their existence in this country. Very similar to what a minstrel show is all about.
Make a joke out of them as unsophisticated, convenience store owners.
Right. Yeah. And it's one thing when this portrayal is done by someone of the ethnic group, but it's a completely different thing when it's done by someone who isn't a part of that group. So that's sort of where that dichotomy comes from. So the question lies, what do we do next with Splash Mountain? What happens to it? Well, Disney's pretty much already made up our mind on it. This is kind of the direction Disney's going with Splash Mountain. And honestly, it's just something to be celebrated. If you can imagine, in 1955, just, less 100, 200 feet away from this attraction, you had a Black woman dressed up in a slave costume selling selling pancakes. And now you have this classic Disney princess kind of telling this magical story in this e-ticket celebrated attraction. If you can flip to the next slide for me.
And it better be the most lavish production that Disney has ever done, because
I agree. Yeah, this is not the attraction to maybe pull any stops out on. Like, no animated faces. I don't even know if that would look good with different skin tones. I don't know. I just don't know. I think this might be the attraction to kind of go all out in and kind of celebrate this character and relish in her fabulous, character.
And I want to be sorry. Go ahead.
I'm super excited to go on this attraction to find out how they do that, how they handle all the different drops, because there are quite a few drops in the attraction. There's 3 or 4 besides the big one at the end. I'm super curious to see how they integrate those into the story of the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say that, look, like, Princess and the Frog was made several years ago, and it is amazing. It really, when you stop and think about the fact that it took so long to have, a Black or an African American person depicted in a positive light in a Disney film, it's pretty crazy when you think about that. And so, like, why haven't there been, there's not any attractions out there that are centered around that, that kind of positive princess thing. So it's really great. But we also know there are problems with the original film too, like they are analyzing that, and they know that there were depictions and things around voodoo and things like that, might not be great, so it's nothing, none of this is, everything needs to be analyzed, right? Just like Damien said, like, we have to get ahead of this, and we have to do the research, and we have to figure out, okay, and even if you have problematic source material like Princess Frog, even though it's great, there, like I said, there are things that they made adjustments and they've admitted, which is great, or at least maybe not publicly. I mean, I'm just, but it's okay, and the ride's gonna be great. It's really hard to mess up a log flume anyway. Like, it's so much of that is just the fun and the water and the
exactly.
So I'm excited for it. I'm ready for it, and I hope they spread it around the world, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I know there's only one other Splash Mountain out there, but I mean, it'd be a perfect.
Take it down, folks.
Yeah, I mean, there was also some concerns related to its location in Frontierland, at least on our coast. What's interesting to note is that Song of the South is set in Georgia, nowhere near where the frontiers of America were set. If anything, Georgia's further east than Louisiana is when it comes to the old frontier and the old west. So there was already sort of an issue with placement anyway. So that shouldn't really be a concern. And of course, on the West Coast, it's right next to New Orleans Square. So New Orleans Square can just grow a bit and kind of add Tiana into that attraction anyway. So
no, I think it's a great fit, especially in Disneyland. I think that's going to be
absolutely
just that journey from the west. It's almost like you're going from west to east a little bit when you go from Frontierland and then in through New Orleans Square and then past the mansion with the plantation style neo-colonialist mansion, and then you go into sort of like the deep south in Critter Country.
And when you have an English bear. Then you have a bear from the UK also over there too.
Yeah. I don't know about that. What I will say is right after the Splash Mountain announcement, my wife and I, we sat around and we watched Princess and the Frog, and I was like, this movie is so much more appropriate source material for a log ride than Song of the South, which has no logs. It's like they were. It's a really. So I think that this is going to be. It is going to be hard to mess up this ride, and we encourage and hope that Disney is having a lot of diverse voices at the table that are creating it to help create it, because that'd be really important to do that right for the first ride. We're all about representation here, and we know it's possible, right?
So representation is amazing. If you want to put that next slide up on the screen, it's definitely just a wild ride. I was looking through a lot of my old character photos, and I couldn't find any with any characters that looked like me. The sole exception was Frozone. That's the only kind of character that I kind of identified with until Tiana sort of came in, and then you have some other characters that have kind of worked through the ways. So Esmeralda was kind of hard to find. You have the Dora Milaje over in California Adventure, and Black Panther as well. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge also opened with a blackface character. And of course, Moana came out, and then Up as well had an Asian American character depicted there. So it's definitely interesting to note that in the same theme park that formerly had a slave selling pancakes. You have all of these different diverse characters telling stories, and I think it's rather wonderful and something that we should definitely celebrate kind of moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, what's next?
I have one final slide about kind of different equity issues in tech. I don't work in tech. I don't know a lot about tech. I draw pictures of buildings. So tech isn't my forte. But I know there were some concerns when it came to different ride types and different other equity issues. The big kicker that I saw was the Secret Life of Pets attraction. When I developed this PowerPoint, it was before the attraction actually opened. This was just from speculation. This was just hearsay. A lot of guests experienced concerns with the seats over in the Pets attraction. It being a slow moving dark ride, for it to have individual seats with individual lap bars with divisions was definitely not in character for an attraction of that caliber. And it kind of restricts guests from riding it that possibly could reasonably ride the attraction. Obviously, safety should come first. Absolutely. But when it comes to family style dark rides, we should be able to accommodate as many people as we can. So a lot of the need for a lap bar on an attraction like this would be so just guests don't get out, not necessarily because the ride's going to do something that could get them to fall out. So if you look at attractions like Pinocchio's Daring Journey or even the Haunted Mansion, these attractions have lap bars that are pretty accessible to most people, that can fit most guests rather comfortably. But then these seats over in Pets kind of don't accommodate people. So I definitely see a change coming very soon, because as this attraction opened for previews, this was a concern for many guests moving forward.
Yeah, I saw the pictures and I was just like, I know it's why it's like that, because they don't want little kids falling out or squirming out and running all over everywhere. I mean, I totally get that, but like there's got to be, like all you need is seatbelts, just seatbelts.
Well, we hope that they'll take the feedback and do what they need to do.
It's brand new, so absolutely changes are
like replacing the seats in probably 50 of those vehicles, that can't be cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably more like 70. We'll see. But yeah, we'll I mean, look, I'm a tall guy, and we know that in the industry there's some places are a little more uncomfortable for people. Also, if you're a little bit more larger size, and so there are, and some parks are a little bit more dynamic where they have a requirement where, like, okay, you need to take your backpack off. And other parks say every single attraction we do, you need to be able to bring a reasonable size package with you, which is like Disney. There's no ride they have that you cannot bring a backpack on. So these are kind of things that they think of, and different parks have a different attitude. And if you're going to start, that the rides are going to be intense roller coasters and you have an exposed structure like Velocicoaster or Ride Rocket, it totally makes sense. Not a big deal. It's just, how do we adapt to that? And I haven't been on this thing. I don't want to judge it prematurely, but I've never seen an Omnimover type attraction with that kind of safety belt. And I worked one for 6 years. So I'm kind of like, okay, do they do lifty? We'll see what happens. But
it's weird to see a test seat outside that sort of thing. It was definitely a little jarring. Like, oh, I gotta fit on a test seat. I've been overseas with someone who could reasonably fit on most attractions on our side of the coasts, and for her to go abroad and kind of be told you need to get a test seat, it was just it was eye-awakening. It was very strange for her, because that never happens to her. So definitely having that as a regular occurrence in a theme park definitely is uncomfortable sometimes.
That's like when I went to the Adventure Island Camp Discovery ropes course at Shanghai. I'm a big guy. I'm almost 6 feet tall, and I weighed like 250 some odd pounds. And when I waited in line for that thing, and then I got up to like where they give you the harness, and they're like, oh, okay. And then they went like over to like, they had like 3 of these like red harnesses that are just like, oh, these are the American size harness for you, and they get it onto me, and they're like, oh, okay, if this fits, you're good. Yeah, I was right on the outside of the limits for that thing.
I had to get a push or two on the Tron ride, and I'm I'm kind of short. I'm average build, and there's 3 Chinese women, small Chinese women, trying to push this lap,
jamming it onto your back.
It's going to be interesting when we come to the States, when there's a lot of guests that are
yes. I wonder if there's going to be adjustments to those vehicles or not. For larger guests.
Yeah, I was on Mummy yesterday, and like kind of did like it's on, and then I was like, they kind of gave me the triple look, and I was like, are they going to come down and be like the so good. It's like a one click.
Yeah. I'm like that on Green Gots too. It's just like
Oh
Green
yeah,
Gots.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot on Green Gots specifically.
Fetal position, like doing a fatty grunt the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
back row 6 is the best for green guts. That's the trick.
Okay. Gotcha.
So where do we what do you say to those out there that they consider themselves I don't want to say progressive because that's a political thing, but they're open-minded.
Right.
But maybe they're like, I feel like this stuff is going too far, and why can't people just enjoy things? Do you have anything to say to those people?
Yeah, I think my
response
to that sort of thing. Yeah. No, my response is kind of just always have an open mind and be willing to hear from someone. You might not agree with what they have to say the first or second or third, fourth time. But when you hear what they have to say and the reasons behind maybe a change or maybe in addressing a concern that might be inequitable, that thought from what they said will always be in the back of your head. So when you go experience that thing, you will think about it, like, oh my God, they were right. You might not agree at first glance, but just listen to that perception and definitely just learn from it and go forward and kind of see what that concern is and kind of address it moving forward. The perfect example is the Indians and the Redskins teams. When I was growing up, my dad's from Cleveland. My dad was a huge Indians fan, just because that's what he grew up with. He's first generation American from the Philippines, so he's definitely not someone who has any negative perceptions towards Native Americans or Indians, because he's a foreigner or someone of otherism himself, but he just loved the Indians growing up, and as concerns were coming up as to why this sort of team name was offensive, he had a lot of pushback. He didn't really understand the concerns because it was something he grew up with, something he learned with, and he thought it was very respectful. One thing that kind of changed his mind was a similar team down in Akron, about 20-30 minutes from where he lived. There was a sports team titled the Akron Orientals. That was their team name. And he was like, this team name is very offensive. Why are they using my character, my likeness, kind of what I look like, kind of exaggerated features as their mascot? And I was like, Dad, this is how Native American people feel. This is how they feel. And it took him a minute, and he had to grow from it, and he learned, and he thinks the Indians was a very offensive name. Every picture that we have of Chief Wahoo, there's a fantastic photo of my bedroom when I was little of a big Chief Wahoo over my bed. We kind of, got rid of all that imagery. We thought it was very disrespectful, and we grew from it. But we came from a place where we didn't think it was offensive. We learned something. It took a minute. We learned, we heard more perspectives on it, and we changed our opinions, and that's okay. We should definitely normalize kind of learning from new perspectives and learning new things and kind of growing from it and changing from it. We shouldn't make it very scary or very intimidating. And it seems like intimidating, and that's okay. But you should be willing to have those conversations and willing to hear from someone. And that's how you can kind of learn and grow and have new experiences. That's my personal take on it for sure.
No, I think that's really great. And that ties into all the kinds of discussions that we've had about this on the channel over the last year or so, where really it just comes down to being empathetic, looking outside of yourself and your own experience and realizing that other people are having a different experience than you and come from different backgrounds and different cultures, and that, everyone, is valid and their culture is valid, and it's not a, and to never like punch down, if you will, culturally.
Yeah. And one thing about empathy and, as we kind of digest what's happening out there is, sometimes I see a lot of people who will, like when Splash Mountain came out or was being redone, is they'll point to like one person or they'll tokenize one person who is like, it doesn't bother me. And then say, well, it doesn't bother this guy. And it's like, that's not really like, you need to have a diverse set of views and perspectives. People that you definitely may not people that disagree with each other, listen to all these different thoughts, and then you can come to your own conclusion. But I'll tell you, once you have it in your head, it's kind of hard. Like you said, Lito, it's like, it starts to plant a seed and you're like, you really can't enjoy this stuff anymore. But here's the beautiful thing is that there are so many stories that have not been told yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you did,
go ahead.
Yeah, if you did like a chart of all the different Disney movies that feature diverse casts, especially in this day and age, there's a lot of different stories featuring diverse characters. If you look at how many of those have been developed into attractions, the number is very disappointing. I went before they announced Splash Mountain. I was like, let's see if I were to analyze how many people of color are represented in attractions. The number was 2, and the 2 I came up with were Star Wars: Rise of the Resistance and Magic Carpets of Aladdin. That's it. Those are the only sort of things that even feature people of color. There's some shows, maybe some parades, like Festival of the Lion King. Festival of Fantasy has Tiana in the first float. But other than that, there's no permanent attraction or that kind of features these characters. The more stories we tell, the more we should implement them into our our stories and attractions. And it's fantastic to see that we're moving in that direction for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Is so many of these stories have been told from a white person's either colonial point of view or or just those stories. Like there's so many. It's gonna be great. Like when we start getting all this representation in the room and people are like, I want to tell you stories. Where there's so many interesting things that are out there. And we have another comment from Damien. Unfortunately, even in this day and age, people have a lot harder time letting go of nostalgia, especially when rooted in the innocence of a childhood, to take an honest and objective look at the realities that surround it. Nostalgia is a huge obstacle to overcome for many.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah. That was kind of why I showed that photo of me hugging Brer Rabbit as a 2-3-year-old. I didn't know who he was. But I love this was a character I loved. This was an attraction that I've definitely ridden a couple times, ridden and loved it, over the years. But you just have to grow and kind of hear more perspectives, and the more you learn about something, the more negative perceptions that you might have. Splash Mountain is a movie. It's based on a movie that kind of misrepresents people who are like me, and I didn't know anything about it until I went out, sought out the film, learned about it, kind of read about it and researched it, and I was like, this isn't something I'm too comfortable having in the Magic Kingdom anymore, a place that I love. I wouldn't want, a place that I enjoy. I have many memories of the Magic Kingdom and I love the Magic Kingdom pieces, but I don't want to allow it to be tainted with this negative perception either. So sort of that nostalgia factor plays in as well.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think about that nostalgia comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree 100% with Damien. I mean, he's always has a really prescient point of view. Nostalgia, was originally coined as a medical condition, of I think it was Swedish soldiers in the War of 1812 or something like that, and they would when they left home they would get physically ill from being away from home, and the doctor that diagnosed them with this new word called nostalgia, and it was like a disease that had to be cured, and that cure was to go back home to Switzerland. So I think, nostalgia is dangerous. I think nostalgia, can blind you from, the kind of empathy, work that needs to be done with some of these attractions, and certainly with the films and integrating them more into the parks and what have you. So it's nostalgia is kind of a disease. I mean, it's a slippery slope to become too nostalgic about things, or to be nostalgic about anything. It's like, it's one thing to reminisce and be like, oh, well, my childhood was fun and great and all that, but to actively fight against change because of that is dangerous and counterproductive.
Absolutely.
And I mean, and my thought is it's like, we grew up in this fishbowl of our culture. Sorry, I'm like a little small. Of our culture, where things were normalized, a lot of problematic things, and it's like, okay,
right, absolutely.
I love my parents. I love my my mom, my dad, my whoever's my family, everyone, all of my friends. But and it's like they also were a product of the culture too. And so once you start changing your lens, that doesn't mean everyone's a Ku Klux Klan member or worse. It's just they were a product of this, and we're just as Damien said, okay, great. We're not even getting out ahead of this. Things have been already labeled, documented, and we're just coming to an understanding of it. And it doesn't mean that you're a horrible person. It just means that this is where we're going, and there are definitive cultural presentations that I could show you from the 1900s, the 1950s in media, the 1980s, and even if you are like a Trumper, nothing wrong with that. But if you are, you are very conservative, you'd be like, that's not good, because that's what happens, right? Like society is completely different than it is now. And we're a multicultural society and trying to strive for that. So, Lito, any final thoughts before we wrap up this? By the way, this has been a tremendous show. Your presentation was top notch and very thorough, and I thought it would lead for a really great discussion. Of course, come back whenever you want and talk about anything else, not this. But you were passionate about it, so it was great to have you on. But what do you think? Any final thoughts?
I can't think of any final thoughts personally. I think I talked a lot already about, being more open and just hearing more perspective. So I think the best way to move forward is to just question things, not to a point where it's dangerous. You're maybe questioning things too much, but, just think about things that you perceive in media and kind of wonder, if I were someone else, how would I perceive this? And sometimes things can't change. If we were to look at, some forms of some more recent animations, you probably wouldn't do a lot of second guessing. You probably couldn't pick apart as much as some older things. But to just always question, how would someone else perceive this? And sometimes, if you know someone really well, you can always ask. I'm very passionate about sharing my thoughts on different things. Some people aren't, and that's okay. But I love talking about, different ways I perceive media just because I've observed media a lot growing up. But so just different things like that, just how you perceive media and how you should move forward, and definitely just allow for growth to start, and then growth will happen. So,
and like you said, art is not created in a vacuum.
Exactly. Yeah. So just allow yourself to think about who created this movie. Why did they create this movie? Why is it the way that it is now? And if it were made today, would it be made the same way? So.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My connection may have gone out. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. Yeah. And I want to ask somebody, I want to ask Lito this. So we've kind of kept saying it a little bit, and the fact that you wanted to talk about this topic, and we provided the platform for that. And you mentioned to talk to people and talk to your friends. But some people who are in a marginalized community don't want to talk about this. They don't want to comfort white people. It's not their problem. It's not, hey, I'm not here to be your sounding board or to make you feel better about it. Some people hold their point of views. Do you have any recommendations to those, of how to properly navigate those waters?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. So I think personally, there's no uniform Black experience. There's no uniform Asian American experience, at least in my respect. It's a variety of different voices coming together and discussing. That not everyone wants to be the poster child for our race or your race or whatever race as a whole. There's no monolithic voice, and there's no spokesperson. There's not like a person we put on TV and may speak for all of us. That sort of thing just doesn't exist.
Wouldn't that be convenient?
What's important is to just you can ask for perspectives without necessarily bringing up race. You can just say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, what is your outlook on things like this? And if they give you a very nuanced answer and very, very short to the point, take visual cues. They probably don't want to discuss it with you. But you definitely should be open to hearing different viewpoints and kind of putting yourself in a position to hear those viewpoints. So a perfect example of kind of where I'm going with that is having more diverse environments and having more diverse people around you allows for more diverse conversations just to happen. So if you're only surrounded with people who are just like you, you're not going to hear those voices. But if you're surrounded with people who are different from you, you will always hear those voices, whether you want to or whether you don't, because you have different people who think differently than you, and they're kind of going to tell you their perspective, and it might not have anything to do with race, or it definitely could. So I think that's kind of my key to kind of discussing and navigating those complicated conversations, is to just surround yourself with more people so you're always in a position to discuss those sort of things. So that's kind of my outlook on that sort of thing.
I think that's just good advice in general, to surround yourself with people who don't always necessarily share your viewpoint, because then you'll become a richer, more diverse person yourself, a person with diverse points of view.
Yeah, diversity of thought is always a very important topic to have just in mind. So
well, thank you, Lito, so much for coming on the show. That was a really great, thoughtful discussion. We're going to do all of our plugs now. Is there anything you want to plug before we do our TV plugs?
Not that I can think of. Not that I don't really do a lot of plugging things. You can follow me on Instagram at deskbolito. I can drop a link to that somewhere. I do a lot of character photos. I travel a lot. Not anymore, so it's a lot of old photos, and you can kind of just see what I've worked on. I posted a couple of design things. I'm an architecture student, so I do post a lot of design stuff on there too. So if you wanted to give it a look, I'd love some feedback and love to share some people my work. So
How many followers do you have on Instagram?
just shy of 1,000.
That's okay. That's respectable. That's respectable. I love it. For those of you that watched the show, this was a really good discussion, and there were some good comments and people watching, and I appreciate that. We are a community here at TETV. We have a Slack community. So if you are interested in themed entertainment, you're trying to get involved in themed experience, we have a Slack channel. It's open to the public. We post jobs. We have we have resume portfolio reviews. CJ, you actually got your resume reviewed. What did you think of the feedback you got? And I think I reviewed your resume.
I'm muted. I was muted. Yeah, it was helpful. It was a little nerve-wracking to post it out there. I think there's been a couple resumes and portfolios put out there, but it was helpful getting it out there and getting a couple of notes of feedback from Patrick. And I think Patrick's promised the world that he'll review every single resume that gets put into the workspace.
I have. I have done it. I have said that I would do it. And of course, we have jobs postings. It's very active. Every day there's probably like 5 jobs that are posted. Industry announcements. Business to business. If you're a business and you want to publicize anything, go there. Virtual coffee. Go to the virtual coffee. We have A-listers like Dave Cobb and Andy Garfield in here who are willing to get coffee with you. You just post it, and there's a thing where it's going to randomly assign you somebody every 2 weeks to meet. Really cool stuff. I always say I would have loved to have had this when I was getting into an industry. And I think we have over like 150 people that are part of this whole thing now. CJ, can you go ahead and throw the invite into the chat feature for those that are watching and join us there. We got a newsletter on TETV.com. Or not, that's on our website. Themed Experience
TV.
Yeah, ThemeExperienceTV.com. We got a whole thing. But CJ's of course our producer. I brought him on. Looks like he has a haircut. And
the haircut.
We appreciate all of you who've watched the show. There we go. Just copy that email down and
get a pen and pencil and send a self-addressed stamped envelope too.
Now, you can go to ThemeExperienceTV.com and on our Wall page we have something too. But no, this has been a fantastic show, and of course, now we got let's bring Trevor on. Trevor's in the wings. He's another one of our producers here, who's all sorts of awesome. So thanks everybody for joining us here today, and we will see you all on the other side.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thanks so much. Have a good evening.